a thunderstorm in late July 1889 turns a quiet valley into a nightmare of water, and the first scream that echoes through the hills is not from the rushing river but from a private dam that has betrayed its builder. The story begins in the coal mining town of Johnstown, Pennsylvania, where the Allegheny River has carved a narrow gorge over centuries, its banks lined with slate roofs, iron rails, and the soot-stained faces of men who have long lived with the river's caprice. Beat 1. The Quiet Before the Storm. The year is 1889, a time when railroads thrum with freight and factories belch smoke into a sky that is still blue. In the valley, a modest private venture called the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club has erected a concrete and earth dam across the South Fork of the Little Como River. The dam, 56 feet high and 1,200 feet long, was built by a group of wealthy industrialists and socialites who had leased the surrounding land for exclusive hunting. The club's members had a reputation for opulence, but the dam's design was anything but sophisticated. It was a simple spillway with a 20 by 20 foot opening, intended only to let the river flow in a controlled manner. The river itself was a dependable partner for the town's coal miners, who used it to float barges of coal to larger markets. The dam's existence was largely a matter of convenience, a way to keep the river from flooding the club's grounds during heavy rains, and a symbol of the club's dominance over the natural landscape. Beat 2. The Storm and the First Failure. On July 28, a storm rolled in from the west, bringing heavy rain that the already saturated soil could not absorb. The river swelled, its banks cracking under the pressure. Witnesses described a sudden roar as the dam's spillway failed, a sound that was more thunder than water. The water, suddenly unleashed, surged downstream, turning the once calm river into a raging torrent. The first victims were the club's own members. In the early hours of the morning, a group of men in hunting attire were caught in the flood as they attempted to leave the property. The water rose so quickly that they could not escape. The dam's collapse sent a wall of water 100 feet high, sweeping away the club's fence and the wooden structures that lined the shore. Beat 3. The town's descent into chaos. By the time the news reached Johnstown, the flood had already struck the lower town. The river had risen to 20 feet, turning streets into channels of rapid current. The town's 9,000 residents, miners, their families, shopkeepers, and the occasional traveler, found themselves fighting for survival. The flood speed was such that even those who reached the higher ground could not escape its reach. The town's emergency response was hampered by a lack of organized infrastructure. No fire department existed, and the nearest hospital was 2 towns over. The river's current swept away bridges, isolating neighborhoods and preventing rescue parties from reaching the most affected areas. In the chaos, rumors spread. Some claimed the dam was built with inferior materials, others whispered that the club had ignored warnings from local engineers. The truth, however, lay in the dam's basic design, a single spillway that could not handle a storm of that magnitude. Beat 4. The Scale of Devastation. By the morning of July 29, the flood had carved a new path through the town. The river's current had destroyed homes, businesses, and the railroad tracks that had been the lifeline of the region. The official death toll was 2,209, a figure that remains the highest single-event loss of life in American history. The number of injured was in the thousands, and the flood displaced over 10,000 people. The flood's impact was felt far beyond the immediate area. Coal shipments halted, rail lines were severed, and the local economy plunged into a crisis that lasted for years. The event drew national attention, prompting the federal government to investigate the dam's construction and the club's responsibility. The turn, a documented fact, recontextualizes the narrative. In the aftermath, a commission was established to examine the dam's failure. Their findings, published in 1891, revealed that the spillway was designed to handle a maximum flow of 50,000 cubic feet per second, but the storm's peak exceeded 100,000 cubic feet per second. The Commission's report also noted that the club had been aware of the dam's limitations for years, yet no improvements were made. This fact reframes the earlier narrative. The the dam's collapse was not an accident of nature alone but a result of human negligence and economic self-interest. Beat 5. The aftermath and the lasting legacy. The flood's physical scars lingered for decades. The town's rebuilt streets were narrower, the railroad was rerouted, and the river's course was altered. In 1893, the federal government enacted the Flood Control Act, a landmark policy that set the stage for nationwide flood management. Johnstown's tragedy became a cautionary tale, a reminder that engineering must respect the forces of nature. Yet questions remain. The club's members face civil lawsuits, but no criminal charges were ever filed. The dam's owners, many of whom had died or relocated by the time the lawsuits concluded, were never held fully accountable. The flood's memory lives on in memorials, in the names of streets, and in the collective consciousness of the region. The end, an unresolved question. Today, the remnants of the old dam are buried beneath the riverbed, a silent witness to a disaster that shaped an entire nation's approach to flood control. As we look back, we are left with a haunting question: had the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club listened to the warnings of local engineers, would the flood have been averted, or would a different dam have failed in a similar way? The answer remains buried in the river's depths, waiting for future generations to decide what responsibility truly means in the face of nature's fury.